Thanks, Greg. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure for me to be able to chat with you this afternoon. I'm not used to these podiums, so I'm going to struggle with that a little bit. I like to walk around a little bit, but apparently if I do that, you can't hear me. So if I tend to wander a bit and you can't hear me, just raise your hand and I'll wander back to my cubicle here. I thought a lot about what I could talk about today. They just said, hey, Tom, you've got some unique experience. Come chat with us. I said, all right, I'll think about that. And as I thought about my career, mostly what I've done has been leading small organizations, small innovative organizations within a large company, or doing startups. So really when it boils down to change and innovation were the two things that I've really focused my 30 years of career on. So I thought I'd share some ideas on what that means. And in fact, when you think about being in an entrepreneurial environment, or especially when we're changing, there's some very unique challenges, okay? One is you never have enough resources. When you're doing a startup, there's not enough money, not enough people, not enough talent. There's just not enough, period. So learning to manage in that kind of environment is important. We're also, when you're involved in change and innovation, there's not much precedent for making decisions. You know, there's not like, oh, we did it this way last time it worked, let's do it that way this time. But if you're trying something new, a lot of times you have nowhere near enough facts to be able to make good decisions. But you got to make decisions anyway. So we'll talk a little bit about that. It's also interesting, there's a lot of that when you're doing something innovative, you can sometimes threaten other people's organizations. You can threaten their revenue stream. You can threaten some other empire. So you'd be surprised that there'd be a lot of people that want you to fail when you're doing things that are innovative. So we'll talk about that as well. So I put together a list of what I call takeaways. 8 things I hope that you learn. Well, hopefully just one of the 8 I hope you learn today as we chat. I sat in one of these lecture series when I was a student at BYU 30 years ago, and I remember an executive from a large company gave a speech, and I think I went to several of those speeches, and I don't remember one thing from any of them. And he said, you know, as you manage your career, realize there's a difference between 30 years of experience and 1 year of experience 30 times over. I've never forgotten that, and I've kind of almost managed my career that way. So hopefully in my comments today that you'll pick up one thing that you remember. So what I'm going to do is tell you some stories, hopefully that highlight these 8 points. We'll walk through them. But I'll start with giving you a bit of background on what I've done in my career and provide context for those stories. So when I left BYU a lot of years ago, I went to work for McDonnell Douglas Corporation, and they had a group called the Phantom Works. And our objective at Phantom Works was to try things that had never been done before. So I worked on some really, really cool stuff. I got to work on space-based lasers, neutral particle beam weapons, reusable rockets. We had a rocket there down here that was landing on its tail under full propulsion back in the 90s. You know, Elon Musk is trying to pull that off now at SpaceX. We were doing that a long time ago. But lots of cool stuff. And I had a great experience there. And what it taught me was the challenge and the difficulty of our craft. Look, engineering is not easy. There's a reason why you guys are some of the smartest kids on campus, okay? And you think about some of the great technical evolutions that have improved quality of life. You know, they don't come out of the humanities department. And they just don't, right? And so they come out of the engineering department, right? The internet was not invented by, you know, the language and arts department. It's hard stuff. And one thing that you really have to focus on is learning your craft. And when you graduate from college, I'm sorry, you might be at the top of your class, but you're still got a lot to learn. And I spent 10 years working in that environment, sometimes frustrated, right? Thinking the pace is too slow, but boy, did I learn a lot. I learned about the complexities of systems in general. When you have, you design one little component and that becomes part of a greater system or subsystem that becomes part of a greater system, and how all those tie together, how you work with others, how you work with electrical engineers and chemical engineers, how you work with business development people, right? Because if the project isn't going well, it's not going to get funded. And I learned how to manage a team. More importantly, I learned how to manage a team of teams, because that's a whole different skill set. And then when you manage teams of teams of teams, skill sets still. So there's a lot that you can learn. I learned a tremendous amount while working at McDonnell Douglas, and I encourage everyone to learn your craft, right? And we'll talk a bit more about that. After McDonnell Douglas, I was working with one of the executives there, who I'll talk with, one of my mentors, who I'll talk about later. He wanted to leave, he was retiring, he wanted to do some startups, and I thought, heck, I've always wanted to do some startups, so let's go do it. So we formed a company called Universal Space Network. And we built a network of ground stations, these big dishes, all around the world, and put them together via some comm lines, and provided access to people's satellites. We grew to the point where most of NASA's data from NASA satellites came down through our network. We work with the Indian government, we work with the European Space Agency, everyone around the world. We started that company in my co-founder's living room. So I had experience from the very beginning. And it was a kind of unique experience because at the time there were no real commercial aerospace folks. People just didn't do entrepreneurial activities in aerospace. It was all government. But what we did here was we took an asset. Typically people would go spend $10 million on an antenna for one satellite, and it was used a couple hours a day, and they had people at that ground station with patch panels, going like this. And we looked at that and said, there's such a thing as a computer now, and we got some software. I bet you we could automate all that and get rid of all the people. And I'll bet you we could set these things up so that they could be used for many different satellites, not just one. We'll automate the thing. And that's what we did. But we ended up writing 1 million lines of code, building facilities in Australia. We had them in Alaska. We had them in Hawaii. We had them all over. But what the key to that system was is that it worked. And there was a lot of people who didn't think we would succeed, which I'll talk about a little bit in a few minutes as well. But because it worked, right, we were able to have a successful exit for our employees and for our shareholders. The company was acquired by a large company in Europe. Again, because it worked. And that really is the key. My first point of the 8 that I put out there, I said, was vision without execution is hallucination. You can have all the great ideas in the world, right? But if you're not able to pull them off, it's useless. And the way you get good at actually building and designing things is learning your craft and becoming an expert at your craft. You think about those that really have an impact on the world and on technology, they're the really smart guys that really understand, that have worked hard and are prepared. So think about that. So after I left Universal Space Network, I was on the board of a few companies, and a venture fund contacted me and said, hey, we've got this really cool idea. These students out of Stanford have got this amazing vision, but they're struggling with how to pull it off. Could you come help us make that happen? And I spent 4 or 5 months diving into it and decided, hey, what the heck, looks like a lot of fun. But the vision was to create a real-time Google Earth. Right? So instead of looking at Google and seeing your house 2 years ago, you can look there and you can see it hours ago, minutes ago. In addition, have video. How cool would that be? Right? But what a massive vision. And to do that, we had to design and build satellites that had extremely high level of performance, but do it for 10 to 20% of the cost of traditional systems. We had to build big data platforms. We had to do a lot of work to do that. But this is what we ended up doing. These are the satellites that we launched. That's imagery from the satellites. You can see the video from space. That's the effluent from a power plant. You can see the traffic on I-15 down below. You can see the cars moving. The video actually got a lot better. But that's what we ended up doing at Skybox. And to be able to pull that off at Skybox Imaging, literally had to build our own satellites. We had a clean room. We had to design virtually every piece of that satellite in-house. We had to build our own flight computers, our own radios, build our own cameras. We had to build our own flight control system, mission control, design all the procedures for flying those satellites, build our own sensors for the cameras because we couldn't go buy them right off the shelf with the performance and price that we needed. We had to do it in-house. Huge amount of execution risk on the hardware mechanical side. We also had to build a data platform. Think about each satellite put out multiple terabytes a day of data. We'd have a network, a constellation of satellites. We're talking 10 petabytes of data a year. And you want to be able to not only store that, right, but you want to be able to search it as a function of location and as a function of time, because the whole business proposition was change detection, and we can map out what's going on and what's changing on a global scale. But again, a huge vision, lots of people. We built our satellites, put them on rockets. We launched them. They got to orbit, published some imagery. Boom. Google came and made us an offer we couldn't refuse for our company. Again, what's that based on, right? What's that based on, okay? Was it based on a really good idea, and putting out press releases? Do you think Google made an acquisition offer for our company because we could tell spin a good story? No. It's because vision without execution is hallucination. We knew how to build stuff. We put a tremendous amount of focus and effort on engineering excellence and technical excellence. We had the top students from around the country. We had processes in place. We had discipline, and we executed well. And that really is the first point that I want to communicate. If you're thinking about entrepreneurship, any kind of innovation, you have to do it well. One, because a lot of people are going to be telling you can't. But secondly, that's really the only proof in the pudding, is how well you execute. So at Universal Space Network, I was mentioning that we were a startup, And we were threatening a $500 million a year product line from the Honeywell Corporation. And that's a big deal, right? And we were competing on a contract, our first big contract, and it was do or die for us, right? That's the other thing about startup. You know, there's a lot at risk on a lot of the things that you do. Well, this was a do or die contract for us. Honeywell started running this ad, okay, in all the periodicals. And there's a kid, if you can see it, they're playing with some little boxes. He's got a fishbowl on his head. If you notice, he's got a little plastic ray gun on the side. And the caption there is, how much experience does your space network provider really have? And it was all about, you can't trust that they're a bunch of startup. They don't know what they're doing. They're just a bunch of kids, right? And had we not succeeded in developing those systems to a point where they are, people would trust their billion-dollar satellites to our infrastructure, we would have been nothing more than a bunch of kids playing with a bunch of hardware, right? So point number one today, vision without execution is hallucination. Got to know your craft. You got to do it well. Okay, got it? Now we'll move on. Next one, people, people, people. You could say what's the most important in terms of innovation. People's pretty darn important. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I actually have some notes here I guess I can go to. So when you think about how you craft an innovative organization, you've got to have people that have a like mind. You've got to have smart people. One of the most important things you can do is create an environment of excellence, right? You want very, very smart people, but you also have to create an environment where people can be innovative, and I'll talk more about that. So one of my early mentors was the guy named Pete Conrad. Pete was the third man to walk on the moon. He was one of the first to receive the Congressional Space Medal of Honor for really tremendous activity that he did and almost heroic efforts that he did in saving the first Skylab. But just an amazing guy. He was the guy that was a co-founder with Universal Space Network, and he was my boss at McDonnell Douglas Corporation, right? So I got to work very, very closely with him, learned a tremendous amount from him. One of those things is, as a leader, you need to learn your strengths and weaknesses. Because I know you're all smart BYU students, you're in engineering, so you're probably near perfect, but you're not, okay? And you are going to have some weaknesses, and you didn't know what those are. Mr. Conrad, flunked out of high school because he had severe dyslexia. And it wasn't until he got into a school that helped him to cope with it that allowed him to go to Princeton, go to the Navy, get into Top Gun school in Navy. He was the Top Gun. He got the Top Gun award at the Naval Flight Test School. But he learned his strengths and weaknesses, and he surrounded himself with people that had balancing skills. And that's going to be important for you as a leader to know what your skills are, but also the skills of your team, and make sure you couch them accordingly. I've got a little comment up there, no Tulsa. Tulsa stands for total and utter lack of situational awareness. Remember that, total and utter lack of situational awareness. Some leaders, they're clueless about what's going on. They sit in their ivory tower, they take the accolades because they're the boss, but they really don't know what's going on. They don't understand the dynamics of the teams they're leading. They don't understand the dynamics of the products. You've got to be involved and understand what's going on around you. The other thing that's important is character. There's an old saying in the industry, you hire people because of what they know. You fire people because of who they are. And you're going to learn that character matters a lot. You want smart people, but they also have to be good people. And they need to be honest, no ego, those kinds of things. Otherwise, they're just not going to fit in an innovative work team. Their ego is going to get in the way. One of the things that I really focus on is you want truth seekers, not those seeking to be right. And you'll find a work team that, especially with engineers, I don't know what it is, but we have this ego thing. We want to be the smartest guy in the room. We want to be right? And that's not that helpful. You want to be seeking after truth and not trying to be the smartest guy in the room. And you'll find people that are argumentative, they get loud. And as a leader, you got to realize, that guy probably, he might be right, but chances are he's not. And you're going to have to work with these teams and make sure that you're pulling in a diverse group. You can almost think about kind of a company DNA. And you want to make sure you craft that DNA, that you have different perspectives, which I'll talk more about. The other thing that's interesting about people is that you'll hear work groups talk about, especially small companies, we're like a family. We're a family. You know what? You're not a family. You're not. Because think about this. What's the difference between a team and a family? Being a member of a family, it's unconditional. It doesn't matter what you do, we love you, right? We're going to support you. No, that doesn't work that way when you're working on a team. A team is completely opposite. A team is highly conditional, right? If you don't measure the bar, you're out. Okay? So when people talk about, oh, it's a family, no, no, you're a team, and as a leader, you gotta set the bar, right? And if people aren't measuring up and they're not producing, you got to make those hard decisions. And you're going to find in your career as you lead people, you lead teams, making those people decisions are the hard ones. Sometimes you'll have people that mean really well, they're just not cutting it. And if you don't make those changes, other people can look around and go, hey, this guy's not pulling his weight. I mean, why should I? Or, you know what, this person has a negative attitude, he's like a cancer. You're going to have to cut that out. So think about people, the importance of managing people. Character is very, very important, okay? You want to get rid of ego. You got to respect everyone. One little quick story I think is fast. Mr. Conrad, celebrated astronaut, knew virtually every head of state in the country, in the world. He used to tell me, Tom, I can get you in any door in the world, but you better have something good to say when I get you there. He literally knew most heads of state. Pete would never say, this person works for me. He had thousands of people working for McDonnell Douglas. He would always say, this person works with me. You imagine, when I was in visiting with a senator, it was Senator John Glenn, first guy to go in space, and Mr. Conrad introduced me as his coworker. Well, I mean, everybody in the world knows that I worked for Pete, right? But the fact that he said, I work with Tom, gosh, it just made me feel so much better about myself. And when you're leading a group, make sure you think about that. Don't like pretend you're the boss and act like the boss and expect people to treat you that way. Treat everyone with respect. You work with people. People don't work for you. Just think about that. That'll makes a huge difference in people's attitude to you and their desire to follow you, okay? And then, obviously the last one, your actions are so much more powerful than your words. If you're not leading out by doing the right thing, you're gonna fail. All right, the next one. Creativity requires hard work, but it also takes happiness, right? You gotta be happy in the workplace. You've gotta enjoy what you're doing. Your teams have to enjoy what they're doing, okay? And you're gonna have to manage that, and you're gonna have to lead that. We think about startups, okay, in Silicon Valley, and this is kind of what you think of, right? Nerf gun wars, everybody's having a party. Does that seem like is that what it takes? Raise your hand if you think that's what it takes. Well, come on, you have to use, it takes a little bit of that, right? I'll say that's an attribute, but it's far and away from the most important. When I went to work at Skybox, there were 35 people, most of them Stanford students, most of them buddies, right? They're all drinking buddies. I mean, it was a party at Skybox. There was free-flowing alcohol. There was all kinds of craziness going on. And they thought they had like the most creative, best environment possible. And quickly became clear that it was actually pretty toxic because they were all about themselves and having fun. They weren't about respecting other people's ideas. And if you didn't like kind of go with the crowd, then you were sort of shunned. And one of the most important things you can do in creating happiness in a workplace is making sure everybody's opinion is valued, right? You want to get rid of criticism. When you're thinking about a free flowing of ideas, you've heard about brainstorming, you don't ever criticize. You've got to be very, very careful about the criticism that goes on. You've got to make sure you pull out input from everybody on your teams. I've got some notes here about the importance of workforce diversity. When you really want innovation, you want people with different cultural backgrounds, you want people of different genders, you want people that have seen life differently. You want young people, you want old people, and you want them all to mesh together. And to do that, it's about you as the leader showing respect for all those people, okay? And that's the most important thing. I've been in environments, and Mr. Conrad was a naval officer. He was a button-down kind of guy who wore a suit and white shirt every day to work, right? We didn't party like that, but he respected everybody, and we were happy at work, right? So think about that. Environment creates happy. The other couple things that I will tell you is that when you're running a startup or you're leading an innovative group, there's ups and downs like this, and people are going to watch you, right? They're going to see what your facial expressions are. And I learned one of the most important things for me to do at work was just smile. You know, it was interesting to have people, like, they'd even watch what I wear. Ingersoll wore tennis shoes today. I wonder what's going on. Or, you know, he wore a jacket today. I wonder what's going on. But people are going to watch you, right? And one of the more important things you can do to help create that environment is to smile. Especially in startups, you're going to find you have ups and downs. There's going to be some deep valleys. And you don't want your people seeing you all worried, right? Because then they're going to worry. You want to just smile. So think about that. One of the more important things you can do is smile. But again, creativity requires hard work, but also happiness. All right, next point. As I mentioned earlier, you know, when you're working in a startup, you never have enough input there's never enough facts to make decisions, right? You just can't. And typically, you could have 20% of the information you need, but you have to make the decision anyway. And one of my other mentors, a guy named TK Mattingly, who we'll talk about in a minute, taught me this. The importance of really understanding when you're looking at a complex problem that's innovative or trying to make change, what is fact? What do you actually know for fact, right? What do you believe? And what's just cultural bias? And try and separate those out. And I'd go to Mr. Mattingly with different options, and I'd say, okay, here's the things I know. Well, how do you know that? And he would just drive me, sometimes make me crazy. But I learned a lot from him. So Mr. Mattingly, how many people here saw Apollo 13? Well, look at that, wow. So you know all about Apollo 13. So you remember the guy who got exposed to the measles and couldn't go? That was TK Mattingly, okay? He was the Gary Sinise character in the movie. TK is brilliant, maybe one of the smartest people I've ever met. TK, Mr. Conrad passed away shortly after we founded Universal Space Network, and Mr. Mattingly was our chairman of the board, so he was my boss. He was my boss for about 8 years. And TK, again, smartest guy that I think I've ever met, but you think about what he did is he was the guy that figured out how to reduce the power consumption in the command module, right? So that they could power it up and bring those astronauts home. He could solve problems like no other. And that's exactly how he went about it. It was separating fact from belief and from cultural bias. And for those of you that are married, I wouldn't try that at home because it doesn't typically work that well at home. But if you want to just go, solve engineering problems, it's a good one. What do you know and how do you know it? The other thing that's important in a startup around decision making, because it's hard to do, is sometimes you just, when decisions got to get made, you got to make it. A lot of people will postpone it, waiting for the information they need, and it can have negative collateral effects in an organization. You got to make a decision. But also important is be humble enough that, hey, you know what, that was a bad decision. We want to do better, so be willing to change your mind. The other thing that TK taught me, which is kind of interesting as you mature, a lot of people, they want to make decisions quickly. Let's move on. Let's make a decision and move. Well, he taught me, you know what, don't make any decisions until you have to, especially in an innovative environment trying to figure things out. Figure out when does that decision actually have to get made, and let's let data flow in. Let's let facts build, and so to get the strongest foundation we can for that decision. So one of the other important thing about startups and innovation, again, is making good decisions with insufficient information and knowing really what is fact versus belief or cultural bias. All right, next point. Eliminate creative interrupts. How many people here think that you are a master of multitasking? Oh my gosh, nobody raised their hand? A couple of people did. How many people think responding to text messages all day long is a really good way to get things done, right? Yeah, there you go, all right. Well, you're all smarter than most people because science has shown that multitasking basically doesn't work. All it allows you to do is do multiple things poorly, right, and get nothing done correctly, right? So one of the most important things that you can do in the innovative process and in trying to do things that are clever and innovative is to eliminate those creative interrupts. You got to put those things away. And if you see people that are super smart in what they do, they kind of get in the zone, and they'll forget to eat, they'll forget to sleep. They're just, Brian Wood, my friend, Dr. Woodfield is one of those, right? Brian, when I went to school with Brian, and Brian would get in his zone. He couldn't even interrupt the guy because he was just doing good stuff. So work really hard to eliminate those creative interrupts. You've all seen the Eisenhower decision matrix. If you haven't, you should dive into it a little bit. But that really is about the level of urgency across the top, right, on your horizontal axis, and level of importance along the side. And there are those things that are super important, right, that are urgent. You got to just take care of them. And you can get absorbed in doing those things day in and day out. The phone's ringing, you got a crisis with someone at work or whatever, but they just are bombarding you day in and day out, right? But you got to do them. The other thing that those things down in quadrant thing, they're not so important, but they're urgent. You got to make a peace stop, right? You got to do that. So there are certain things that are, but you know what? Creativity typically does not happen in quadrants 1 and 3. It just doesn't. Creativity tends to occur over in quadrant 2 and 4. Quadrants where it's important, but it's not urgent. And if you're mixing those things, you can guarantee just the urgent stuff's going to get done, right? So when I look at creating organizations, managing organizations, I really start to think about, okay, what's important and what is the nature of what they're doing, and organize it so that they have time to be creative and limiting those creative interrupts. For me personally, I think I'm most creative down in quadrant number 4, right? I love to mountain bike. And if I have a really challenging problem, I'll go into work late and I'll go, ride a few miles on my mountain bike, build up a sweat, and really think it through. And it just does wonders for me. But you need to figure out kind of what works for you and where you feel creative, but you've got to eliminate those creative interrupts. I'll give you a quick story. When we were at, when I was managing Universal Space Network, and our reliability was, it got to, customers were okay happy, but we needed to do better. And I was working with our team, and we were kind of laying out ways so we can improve our reliability. And month after month, the statistics were flat. Nothing was getting better. So we sat down as a team, brought in the vice president of operations, and we kind of laid out exactly how he had structured some of these changes we need to make. Well, what he'd done is he'd taken his smartest guy, who was his operations manager, and put him in charge of some of the long-term problem solving. Well, that guy was also in charge of day-to-day operations. So every time there was a problem with a person, whenever there was a crisis with a satellite, whenever there was a crisis with a customer, he's the guy that took that call. So you can imagine how much time did he spend focusing on long-term problems? 0, right? Because he was always busy fighting fires. So we looked at the organization, we kind of carved it up and said, all right, this guy over here, he's going to be no longer in charge of those day-to-day interrupts. He's going to be focused solely on some of these long-term problem solving. I'd say within 2 months, reliability we'd solved many of our problems, reliability had increased, and it was all around just eliminating those creative interrupts. So think about that you've got to be able to take time to innovate and put away your cell phone. Don't answer your texts. Seems like all of you got that concept already, but it's a good one. All right, next one. Maybe a little bit more abstract, but one that seems to be important. I call it understand and respond to your organizational half-life. So, and what does that mean? I'll try and put some context for that. So when you're working at a startup and you've got 10 people, things work really well. The teams are doing great. There's 10 of you. But in the next 2 months, we're going to have 20. That's probably going to work okay with 20. But at Skybox, we went from 35 to 100 in about 3 months. Yikes! Didn't quite work so well. So how do you manage that kind of hyper growth? And what are some important things that you got to watch for, right? And how do you manage through that? Another important mentor taught me that lesson. So Mr. Joe Rothenberg, another good friend and mentor of mine. How many people know about the Hubble Space Telescope? So did you know when they launched the Hubble Space Telescope, it didn't work? What was wrong with it? Anybody know?
There was an issue with the size on the mirror.
The optics of the mirror, right? So it was out of focus. They had not done a systems test, right? So they could not get anywhere near the quality of data that they wanted. They tapped Mr. Rothenberg, who was a mid-level engineer at NASA, put him in charge. He found the problem, led the team to fix the problem, fixed the Hubble Space Telescope, his license plate on his car, HST1, Hubble Space Telescope 1. But Joe is a master engineer, but also a master organizer. Taught me a lot about how to manage fast-paced organizations and how to change sort of large staid organizations. I'm trying to be polite here. But so Joe, after fixing the Hubble Space Telescope, went on to be associate administrator at NASA. So he was in charge of the space station, space shuttle, and everything that orbited the Earth. Had a, I don't know, $12 billion budget that he managed. So big stuff, and knew how to make change. So when you think about how things get done in an organization, there's really 2 ways, right? One is through culture, and the other is through process. So when you're small, kind of in your family, you just do things because that's how you know you do them, right? And they're not written down. There's not a bunch of procedures and manuals you got to follow. It's just kind of how you get things done. But if you have something that you don't want to change or very, very large, you put processes in place. So to launch the space shuttle, it took over 1 million signatures to get the space shuttle launched. At a time, there's almost 2 million. How hard do you think it was to innovate around launching the space shuttle when it was 2 million signatures? Pretty much impossible, don't you think? Which is right. They didn't want any innovation occurring. So they set that organization up so that nothing would possibly change. On the flip side of that, when you have a small company, things are going to get done by culture and the like. The problem with culture, however, is that it's virtually impossible to scale. So if you have 20 employees and you're going to go to 40 very soon, and you don't have anything written down on how to get anything done, how do you do that? You sit down and chat with every single person and say, yeah, we kind of do it like this, and this guy kind of does it like that. So you need to think about the melding of the two. So as you're thinking about innovation, you want to make sure that there's culture and there's flexibility, but you also need process so that it can scale. You also need some process around things that are fixed. So at Skybox, I told you about this big data platform we had to build, right? We were building this platform that could store petabytes of geospatial data. Well, we had a very, very innovative group of software engineers. We had about 45 of them, and you just ask them, they'll tell you they're the smartest people on the planet, okay? Egos fill the room, but very, very good. But they hated process. They didn't want to talk about requirements. They just wanted to write code, write code, write code. So it took me 6 or 7 months to finally get some process in there. We brought some experts in from Facebook, from Google, from all over the valley to really help these guys develop best practices. We got to the point where the software was actually working well. We'd get a new release, the release would work well, it would integrate, off we go. We went through 2 release cycles, outstanding software. The third one was a disaster. So I called our vice president of software, I said, well, you know, what happened? Did you follow these processes? He goes, oh, no, this stuff was working so well, we got rid of all those processes, we went back to the old way. Well, okay. So you think about in a lot of environments, you just want culture, you want things to work in an unorganized way, but it just doesn't work that way. So you do need process and focus on that. So you'll need process around quality control and good quality. You're definitely going to need process around money, right? Can't let people spend money without any kind of control on it. But as you organize teams, as you lead teams, and as you think about innovation, think about how much is being what's process and what's culture. And the more culture, the more change, right? The more innovation. So again, important lesson learned. Next point, get and listen to good mentors. So old guys like me and old guys like Dr. Whitfield, I mean, we want to help people, right? We've spent a lot of time in our career. We've tried to do something good. We want to pass on to the next generation. And we're going to be very free with ideas. Mr. Conrad was a fabulous mentor for me. TK Mattingly was a painful mentor for me. I will tell you the first year I worked with TK, I wanted to shoot him, right? And because I'd call him and I'd have a quick question for him or just something little I wanted to communicate with him, and it would be a 2-hour conversation because he would dissect every single word I said. And it was so frustrating for me. But I got to the point where I learned, my goodness, you know, it was 2 hours, but he caused me to think about the problem in a completely different way and come up with a solution set I never would have thought of before. And it took me a long time to kind of get patient enough to listen to him, but once I did, I realized, oh my gosh, this guy's a genius. And it really helped transform me as a leader in the way I listen to other people and in the advice that I give. But these are 3 mentors I've had. I've had many, many others. All of them have taught me tremendously important elements of being successful. But to do so, you have to listen. Mr. Rothenberg, I've worked very closely with Joe Rothenberg for lots of years. After we retired from NASA, he worked with me at Universal Space Network. When we sold that, he came to work with me at Google. And when I first brought him in, we had these brilliant Stanford kids, and I introduced him to Joe, and Joe had a little bit of gray hair, and he kind of told stories. And after a couple months, we're like, get rid of this guy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. All he does is kind of babble on, he kind of rambles. You got to get rid of him. And I said, you know what, guys, just trust me. This guy has already demonstrated his ability to succeed in this world in ways you never probably will. Just be patient, okay? Yeah. And so it was about 6 or 8 months later that some of the guys came back. I could kind of see it. Yeah, I could kind of see it. But I had to force them to listen to Joe. And it was interesting. After Skybox was acquired by Google, I went off and doing other things. Joe was there leading the Skybox team at Google. I mean, really was embraced by the team. But just because you have no hair or gray hair doesn't mean you know what you're talking about. We might communicate with you in a little bit different way, but what you're going to find, kind of listen to me here real quick, is these mentors can look around the corners. They know what problems are coming your way, right? You think you're super smart and you know what's going to happen, but there's a lot of intangibles, things you can't learn in school, things they don't write in books, and they'll help you avoid a lot of those problems that you don't see coming, all right? So get and listen to good mentors. The last one I want to mention, don't do this in all the speeches, but here at BYU I think it makes perfect sense, is when you're doing new things and you're trying to change the world, don't forget to pray. I was chatting with my wife about this presentation a little bit, and I kind of said, do you remember this instant here? She goes, well, I don't remember that one, but I remember you praying through a lot of crises. And I think that's really true. And I'll give you one just very clear example, one that I will never forget, happened at Universal Space Network. So I showed you that little poster back there with the guy with the little ray gun. Honeywell was out to get us. Everyone was out to get us. And we were bidding this contract, and it was a big contract for a small company. It was a multi-million-dollar contract. And we'd submitted our bid. Honeywell and Universal Space Network were the only two viable competitors, so we were excited about that. Then I get a phone call from someone at NASA said, hey, you guys are in the bid, you're in the mix, but your bid's too high. You got to lower your bid. And you got to submit the new bid tomorrow, close the business. Click. Yikes. So we gathered as a team, like, oh man, I think we'd bid $15.5 million. And if you don't bid enough, right, it's worse than having no contract. And we were venture capital backed. We were trying to raise more capital. If we had the wrong kind of contract, we were toast. But if we didn't win the contract, frankly, we were probably toast as well. It was a big deal for us. And if we couldn't win the contract, investors were probably going to go a different direction. So there was a lot of head scratching that went on that day about what to bid. So they all looked to me and said, okay, Tom, you're the guy. What's the number? And I said, well, no, let me think about it, and I'll come back and tell you in the morning. So I went home and said some serious prayers about what to bid at Universal Space Network. And when I woke up that morning, there was the number 10.2 tattooed on my forehead. I mean, it wasn't, but it just felt absolutely tattooed on my forehead, 10.2. And it wasn't $10.2 million of winning bid, it was just 10.2. That's just all it was. So I get into work, and Mr. Conrad's there and some other guys, and okay, what's the number, Tom? And I go, 10.2. They go, how'd you come up with that? Well, it's a divine intervention, I hope. But so I don't know. I prayed about it. That was the number. They said, okay, good enough for us. So we submitted. I mean, really, we had no basis for making that decision. Back to one of the challenges in a startup. You don't really know. And so we gave them the number, 10.2. And 2 weeks later, got the phone call, hey, congratulations, you guys won the contract. We're like, yes. Of course, but then instantly we're thinking, man, should have been 10.5? Should have been 11.5? How much money did we leave on the table? But 10.2 we won, we're happy. So I get called back to Johnson Space Flight Center, meet with our program manager, and he says, Tom, you know what, I want to show you something. Go look at my office. So he had on his office our proposal and the Honeywell proposal. Our number was $10.2 million. The Honeywell proposal was $10.25 million. We won that contract by $50,000. Woo! I could give you lots of examples, but we're here to succeed in life. We've been counseled to pray over our flocks and over our farms and our orchards and whatever. You should remember the importance of prayer. It'll help you solve a lot of problems, and it has helped me. So running out of time here, but these are the 8 points that hopefully you've walked away with. The one on top, I've given a number of lectures on that one alone. Vision without execution is hallucination. Learn your craft, okay? Put in the time. If you really want to do something important in this world, learn your craft, learn it well. Manage people. Those are going to be the hardest decisions that you have to make, but they're going to be important. And hopefully you've learned one thing here from my message that you'll take out, and thanks for having me. We done? Time for questions or? Any questions? Can I field any questions from anybody? I think we've got a couple of minutes. Otherwise, we'll get you.
If you had any advice, how would you advise, what are some of the best ways that you have seen to find good mentors that are your area of work to succeed?
The question was, how do you find good mentors? And one, be a nice person, right? Don't be a jerk. Be a nice person. And they'll kind of naturally come your way. Work hard, ask questions, and then seek them out. You've got LinkedIn, for goodness sake. I didn't have LinkedIn when I was your age. There's lots of ways to go to send out some notes, but you're going to find if you're honest, if you're a nice person, people are going to want to help you. Question?
You really stuck out to me when you said to get different types of people, like old, young, different races. How would you say would be the best way in general to make that happen? I mean, for a general team.
It's hard to do because you can't really have hiring practices that do that. It's kind of against the law. But you can sure, for example, at Skybox, we recruited at a women's, there was an educational group that was founded for women to learn to write software. So we went recruiting there. And surprisingly, all the people that applied were women. You know? So there's ways you can do that. But I will tell you, when you do that, the important thing is you listen to them. Because especially people, there are certain cultures that aren't going to quite be as vocal, they're not going to listen. You're going to have to seek out their input. But I tell you, we've solved some really interesting problems by having people with different perspectives provide input and pull their input. You have to get creative in doing that. What you don't want to do is shun it. Because I see a lot of people, they like to hire people just like themselves, right? Well, I'm a Stanford guy, and I like to drink, and I went to frat. I want all my frat brothers in my company, okay? That's just not going to work. So be open to, you know, people with different backgrounds. You're going to find success in that approach. One more question, I'm told. Go ahead.
How were you able to find so much talent in that company?
So, great question. How I was able to find so much talent? Brilliant people attract other brilliant people. Anybody who wants to be successful works with other successful people. I call them pockets of competence. Even in large organizations, all the smart people tend to attract one another, right? Conversely, you know, less capable people don't want to work with sharp people. They want to work with less capable people because they look bad, right? So you just want to just find sharp people and work with them, and stay with them. And if you're working with them, you definitely don't want to be the smartest guy in the room. If you were in a company and you're the smartest guy in the room, you got to be on your way, right? You always want to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, and that'll naturally begin to happen, okay? All right, we're good. Thank you.